It's time now for the World Brief and review of some headlines from today's newspapers. Let's start with telling you what's happening around the world. Now, the Trump administration has welcomed on Monday 59 white South Africans it granted refugee status in the United States to, having deemed them victims of racial discrimination while drawing criticism from Democrats and stirring confusion in South Africa. Now, the group of white South Africans who landed at Dulles Airport near Washington, D.C. on Monday received a warm welcome from U.S. authorities. Now, the processing of refugees in the United States often takes months, even years, but this group have been fast-tracked. Now, UNHCR, which is the United Nations Refugee Agency, they did confirm that it was not involved in the vetting, as is usually the case. Now, the Episcopal Church in the United States announced on Monday that it would no longer work with the federal government on refugees after it was asked to help settle the Afrikaners. Now, the church said that it had been painful to watch one group of refugees selected in a highly unusual manner to receive preferential treatment over many others who have been waiting in refugee camps or dangerous conditions for years. Now, moving to the Middle East now, where Hamas has freed the last living U.S. citizen it held in Gaza in a unilateral move Donald Trump described as a good faith step towards ending the war and bringing home all remaining hostages. Now, the release of 20-year-old soldier Eden Alexander, a dual national serving in the Israeli Defense Forces, who spent 584 days in captivity after he was seized from his base on the 7th of October 2023, was agreed with little Israeli involvement beyond practical coordination on the ground. There was no ceasefire in Gaza for his return, although Israel paused fighting from midday for the handover, which came as UN-backed experts warned that 500,000 Palestinians face starvation in Gaza due to Israel's weeks-long siege. Now, Alexander was dressed in civilian clothes when masked fighters handed him to Red Cross officials. He was driven to the border with Israel, where family who had flown over from the United States were waiting to meet him after his initial checkup. And the United States President Donald Trump is due to arrive in Saudi Arabia today as part of his 3-day trip across the Middle East. Now, finally, former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has won a mayoral election in his home city by a landslide, despite his detention half a world away at The Hague. Now, after 80% of votes were counted, Duterte, who was brought to The Hague in March over his bloody war on drugs that killed thousands of people, was winning the Davao mayoral contest with 8 times more votes than his nearest rival. The victory during the nationwide midterm elections is testament to the 80-year-old's enduring influence in the southern city, owing to his reputation as a crime buster. Now, the former president's 2 sons were also set to win posts on Monday, one re-elected congressman and the other winning the contest for Davao vice mayor and likely to serve in his father's absence. Now, the family's political resilience and dominance in Davao could prove pivotal as Duterte's popular daughter, Vice President Sara Duterte, who's in the middle there, faces an impeachment trial that could see her banned from politics for life if convicted, killing off any hopes of a presidential run. So Dr. Rubin there from Rodrigo Duterte winning a landslide by a huge margin despite being in the custody of The Hague. There's a lot to discuss there.
Okay, well, 60% of the votes counted for the mayoral election in Davao, which is the homeland of Duterte, Rodrigo. Yes. He has won about 405,000 votes. Mm-hmm. The closest person to him has a total of 49,000 votes. Now, again, you have his son, Sebastian, also who is running for vice mayor, you know, also looking, according to the local media reports, like he will win. And the expectation is that if he's unable to come and take the position, maybe his son will act in his place. After all, he's in incarceration in the Netherlands on the authority of the International Criminal Court, accusing him of crimes against humanity. Under Duterte as president, he was president of the Philippines. He had this war on drugs. And under that dispensation, he ordered that young men, thousands of them, who could be remotely or nearly associated with drug trafficking should be shot on the streets of the Philippines. Now, that's why he's there. So two things. One, unfortunately, he remains popular, very popular in his country, where the word unfortunately may not, be agreed to by his own supporters. And even in incarceration, in detention at the Hague, he's still very popular. He's winning election. His children are winning election. One major thing in the politics of the Philippines has to do with the rivalry between the Duterte family and the Ferdinand Marcos Jr. family. And that has created a lot of tension, in fact, leading to a situation whereby Sarah Duterte, that's the daughter,
yes,
who ran as a vice president with the present president, had to be impeached from office on the grounds that she mismanaged some funds. So that's the reality of the politics. But it's interesting to see that a man can still win election overwhelmingly, even from being in an international criminal court detention. But we'll see how it plays out. This is a competition between the Marcos family and the Duterte family. But the International Criminal Court is not going to inquire into domestic politics and say, oh, there are emotional reasons for this. Even if Sarah Duterte says they are engaging with the ICC to see if he could be released on the grounds of his seeming obvious popularity in his country. Now, this second thing has to be the arrival of the Afrikaners. Yes. We discussed it yesterday, and we said that, okay, these persons were on their way to the United States. Now they have arrived at Dulles International, and they have been received by the State Department and also the Deputy Secretary in charge of Homeland Security on a U.S. government-chartered aircraft. So the issues here, one, double standards. The same Trump government that suspended the U.S. refugee program in January has now given expedited approval for these Afrikaners, Dutch colonist descendants, to come to the United States. Now, refugee agencies in the U.S. are appalled. And their simple argument is that you have suspended the refugee program, but you have made an exception for these white South Africans. When funding is not being provided for many of the refugee programs, no help for Afghan nationals who fought along with the U.S. military in Afghanistan. Now you have just brought this South Africa. So there's a lot of rumbling in that regard. The second is the Episcopal Church that has partnered over the years with the federal government on refugee programs. They are saying that this raises a moral question and of partiality. That what is special about these white South Africans? Which takes me to the third point. It will seem, therefore, that the Foreign Ministry of South Africa will have a point when they concluded that this is politically motivated and that President Trump is playing politics, not talking about the reality in South Africa. Very quickly, President Trump goes to Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
On the eve of his arrival, Hamas releases the last living American hostage in the person of Idan Alexander. Well, the Israelis were not involved in the negotiations, but Qatar and Egypt were involved. It's a triumph of diplomacy for the United States. President Trump says this is something that has been done in good faith.
Yes.
Now, the people of Hamas, they themselves say, okay, they've done this, just to show that they are committed to the idea of a ceasefire. But there is no ceasefire. There was a cessation of hostilities for 2 days to allow the release. But in Israel, Netanyahu himself, Prime Minister Netanyahu, is calling for negotiations in Doha. But at home, he's facing serious problems with the far-right associates that are propping up his government. And they are saying, no, they don't want any negotiation. They just want Gaza to be obliterated. So whatever gain is this, there are still about 54 people remaining. Trump says 20 of them are still alive. Netanyahu says 24 of them are alive. But Israel itself is under a lot of pressure. Would President Trump's shuttle diplomacy be able to achieve anything? We will see.
Well, we'll have to wait and find out. Let's move on now to newspaper headlines. As ever, we begin with This Day. And this morning, This Day does lead with the World Bank urging a full transfer of the subsidy removal revenues to the Federation accounts. Now, that's as the institution says Nigeria becoming a $1 trillion economy is only possible if the economy grows 5 times faster. Now, this week's edition of The Advocate by Onikepo Braithwaite is an article titled Democracy, Subnationals and Unconstitutional Security Outfits. Now, during this article, which she examines the arguments, really, that non-police force security organizations such as Amotekun, Bubuagu, ISBA, she argues that they appear to be unconstitutional. So always a great legal debate there on her column. Moving on to the New Telegraph this morning, following on from his media parley yesterday, FCT Minister Nyesom Wike and PDP chieftain of the opposition party PDP says that it must zone its presidency ticket to the south. The New Telegraph also reports that Nigerian girls have been trafficked by Russia to help the country during its war in Ukraine. Now, this looks at the Alagbuga Start World Program that encourages young and talented women aged between 18 to 22 to immigrate to Russia for further studies and job opportunities. Now, the salary from some students is nearly $1,000. But according to the newspaper sources in this article, these girls are instead allegedly being forced to manufacture and assemble weapons, a claim which has been denied by an unnamed source at the Russian embassy in Abuja. So quite interesting stories there. The Guardian this morning in Nigeria leads with the World Bank again acknowledging progress in Nigeria's economic growth, particularly its fastest growth in a decade found in 2024, but also highlights the continuing challenge of high inflation. While the World Bank report projects economic growth of 3.6% this year, it also predicts a high inflation rate of 22.1%. Now, this indicates that while the economy is expanding, the cost of living remains a significant issue. Now, some stories centering on education along the bottom of today's Daily Sun. Firstly, you've got the story that says that this UTME mass failure essentially has constituted a system review of the JAM process as IT experts have been brought on to improve any type of technical glitches. And if we move on quickly to UK papers, let's take a look at The Guardian, which leads with Prime Minister Keir Starmer defending his plans to curb net migration after an angry backlash from MPs, businesses and industry to a speech in which he said that the UK risks becoming an island of strangers without tough new policies. Now, that rhetoric was likened by some critics to the language of Enoch Powell. And the Prime Minister was accused of pandering to the populist right by insisting he intended to take back control of UK borders and end, in his words, a squalid chapter of rising inward migration. Now, following on from that, the Daily Mirror this morning joined several UK papers in reporting the news of counter-terrorism officers investigating a fire at the home of Prime Minister Keir Starmer on their front pages. Essentially, there's a fear that there's a link between what he had said the day before and perhaps a probe, a fire at the Prime Minister's house. That's what they are investigating.
Okay, very quick comment. Minister Nyesom Wike, having attended the PDP governors meeting on Sunday, now says that if PDP wants to make any progress, it must zone the presidency to the south. Mm-hmm. Well, on the surface of it, you see consistency. Minister Wike has been consistent in that regard, which led to his putting together of the G5, that wrong-footed, that sabotaged the presidential, the People's Democratic Party in the 2023 elections. But given the fact that he's openly supportive of President Tinubu, given the fact that he's an amphibious politician, a leg in the PDP, a leg in the APC, he serves as Minister APC, is campaigning very openly for President Tinubu. He has a leg also still in the PDP, still attending meetings. So if the People's Democratic Party, a party which he says cannot expel him, then feels a southern candidate in line with his own ideological position in 2027, will he abandon President Tinubu and go back to support PDP, which has shown no courage to be able to expel him from the party? As the issue of trafficking of girls, now I made a point yesterday under another segment of this program that the National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons is in urgent need of reform. Now, the nature of that reform, even if I have any ideas, I do not intend to go into the details of whatever I think. Because these girls that are trafficked to Russia, don't they go through our borders? Who is tracking all these abuses? Yeah. That, in my view, is the issue.
Agreed. Well, thank you very much for your analysis as always.